The wind came down from the high country like a wounded thing, low, lonely, and unrelenting. It carried the smell of pine sap and old sorrow as it swept across the empty plains. Silas Brant rode into it, his hat pulled low, one arm curled around a small bundle that stirred faintly against his chest. Snowflakes clung to his beard like white embers. Behind him, the horizon was a blur of gray and ash. Ahead, a cabin squatted at the edge of the world, smoke rising thinly from its crooked chimney. The baby's soft whimper was the only sound that didn't belong to winter. Inside, the cabin groaned in rhythm with the wind. Silas laid the child, his daughter Clara, into the cradle he'd carved himself last spring when his world still had color. The scent of his late wife lingered faintly on the woolen blankets, lavender and earth. He stood there for a long moment, gloved hand gripping the edge of the cradle, his breath coming out in fogged ribbons. Clara's face was pink from fever, her eyes half-lidded, searching for a comfort he could not give. He murmured her name as if saying it could heal her. "Clara, girl." "Hush now," his voice cracked. The small fire hissed in the hearth, struggling to stay alive. Outside, the snow thickened into a white wall, burying the path to town. The storm had come early that year, earlier than the feed store owner predicted. Earlier than Silas's hope. There was milk somewhere in town, perhaps at Doc Holleran's or the Mercantile. But the horse could barely make it through the drifts, and the baby's cries were growing thin, bird-like. Silas leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Sleep hadn't touched him in 3 nights. Guilt never let him rest. He could still hear Alara's final breath, the rasp that had followed the midwife's desperate silence. He'd buried her beneath the cottonwood behind the barn, where the wind now moaned like her voice trying to return. He walked to the window. The glass was fogged with frost, the world beyond it barely visible, a colorless waste. For a moment, he thought of leaving, taking Clara, riding till the snow swallowed them both. But he stayed. A man could fight many things, but not the memory of a promise made to the dying. Keep her safe. Silas. When Clara began crying again, weak and hoarse, he lifted her against his chest and whispered nonsense until the sound turned to hiccups. The cradle creaked like an old rocking chair, the kind his father once sat in when teaching him patience. He wasn't sure he'd learned. By noon, the storm had swallowed even the faint line of fence posts that marked his land. The world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the fire, the cradle, and his heart's dull ache. He decided then that waiting meant death. Wrapping the baby tight, he saddled his horse, old Jeb, a patient chestnut with frost gathering on his mane, and began the long crawl toward town. Snow cut across his face like salt. The wind shoved at him from all sides. Clara whimpered under his coat, and he whispered promises into the storm. Empty words meant more for himself than for her. By the time he reached the edge of town, his fingers were numb, his lips cracked and bleeding. The streets were near empty. A few lamps flickered in the saloon windows, but no music came from within. He guided the horse to the livery, dismounted stiffly, and trudged toward the doctor's office. The bell above the door jingled weakly when he pushed it open. Doc Holleran looked up from his papers, eyes weary but kind. "Silas Brant," he said quietly. "You look half frozen. Clara's sick. Needs milk." "I can't." His words dissolved into the air. The doctor examined the child with slow, practiced hands. "Not fevered bad yet," he muttered, "but she won't last long without nourishment." He rummaged through a cabinet and shook his head. "Ain't got any. Tried ordering from the east, but wagons got stuck near the pass." Silas swallowed hard. "There must be someone with a wet nurse." Doc Holleran sighed. "There's Mrs. Tully, but she's past that age. Maybe the widow Turner, though she's got mouths of her own to feed." "I'll pay," Silas said. The doctor looked at him with a mixture of pity and sorrow. "You could offer gold and still find hearts colder than this winter, son. Folks don't take kindly to bad luck, and you've carried more than your share." Silas nodded once, tucked the baby close, and left without another word. At the Mercantile, he was met with the same sidelong stares. Mrs. Tully herself stood behind the counter, counting beans into a tin scoop. Her sharp eyes darted toward the bundle in his arms. "That baby still breathin'?" she asked flatly. "She is?" Shame what happened to Alara. Some say a curse don't lift easy." Silas's jaw tightened. "You sell milk powder or don't you?" "Out. Maybe next wagon brings some. Or maybe it don't." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Men ain't meant to raise babies alone, Mr. Brant. You best send her to your wife's kin down south." He left before anger found its way out of him. Snow had started again, softer now but endless. Each flake seemed to whisper a name, his, hers, theirs. By the time he reached the cabin again, darkness had swallowed the land whole. The baby's breathing was shallow, her cries faint as candlelight. He fed the fire with the last of his wood, watched the flames shudder low, and sank to his knees beside the cradle. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words felt heavy, used too many times already. "I don't know how to do this." The wind rose, and for a moment, he thought he heard an answer in it. A woman's hum. A lullaby he once knew. He lifted his head. The sound grew clearer. Not wind, but something knocking softly against the door. He froze. The knock came again. Hesitant. Weak. He stood slowly, hand brushing the gun at his hip, and opened the door. A woman stood there, wrapped in rags that fluttered like torn wings. Her hair was matted with snow, her lips blue. In her eyes flickered something wild and fragile, like the last ember of a dying fire. "Please," she breathed. "I just need warmth." Silas stared. For a heartbeat, he thought she was a ghost come down from the hills. Then he saw the trembling in her legs, the frostbitten fingers clutching a torn shawl, and the hunger carved deep into her cheeks. He stepped aside without a word. She stumbled in, collapsing near the hearth. The firelight painted her skin gold again, thawing her from stone to flesh. She shivered violently, clutching her knees. Silas closed the door against the storm. The silence that followed was so thick it seemed alive. He poured her a tin cup of water, set it by her side. She nodded faintly, voice hoarse. "Thank you. I've been walking 2 days. Didn't think I'd find a soul left. Most folks keep to themselves out here." She smiled weakly. "Ain't that the truth?" Her gaze drifted toward the cradle. "Is that your child?" "Yes. She's crying," the woman whispered. Hungry, he knelt beside the cradle, rocking it with one finger. "She won't take anything I give her. Ain't had milk for days." Something changed in the woman's eyes then. A flicker of knowing. A mother's instinct rising from beneath exhaustion. She set down the cup and reached out slowly, reverently, as if afraid to ask. "May I hold her?" Silas hesitated. The world had taught him not to trust kindness, not from strangers, not when winter made every heart cautious. But Clara's crying turned into a desperate wail, and his arms trembled with helplessness. He handed her over. The woman cradled the child like she'd been waiting her whole life for that moment. Clara's cries softened almost instantly, her tiny fingers curling against the stranger's worn coat. The woman hummed something under her breath, a melody rough with memory yet soft enough to quiet the air itself. Silas stared, disbelief and relief warring in his chest. "You've done this before," he murmured. "I had a son," she said quietly. "Didn't last through the cold. My milk, it never stopped." Her voice broke. Maybe it was waiting for her. He turned away, throat tight. The fire crackled. The baby suckled faintly, and the world seemed to exhale for the first time in days. When Silas finally spoke, his voice was softer than the wind outside. "You can stay till the storm ends." She looked up at him, eyes bright with gratitude and something older, something like grace. He nodded toward the corner where extra blankets lay folded. She nodded back, tears glimmering though she tried to hide them. The cabin felt different now. The silence had a pulse to it, the kind that beats between two people who have both known hunger and loss, and still choose to breathe. The firelight flickered over the woman's face, over the cradle, over the weary man who stood watching the miracle of quiet salvation unfold. Outside, the snow fell steady and unbroken, sealing them in together, two lost souls thawing beneath the same fragile roof. And somewhere deep in that endless white, the wind changed its song. It no longer cried the names of the dead but hummed a lullaby for the living. That night, Silas sat by the fire, eyes heavy, hands clasped. The baby slept sound, and the woman, whose name he had not yet asked, dozed against the wall, her breath steady. He looked at them both and thought that maybe winter wasn't just a season. Maybe it was a test, to see which hearts could still offer warmth when the world turned to ice. He didn't know what morning would bring, only that for the first time in months, he was not entirely alone. The storm eased its howl, turning to a whisper that sounded almost like mercy, and in that frozen silence, Silas Brant closed his eyes, the image of the stranger and his child burning softly against the dark. When dawn crept over the horizon, it did so timidly, as if unsure it had permission to break through the storm. The light was a pale silver, filtered through frost on the cabin window. Silas woke to the sound of gentle humming. For a moment, he thought it was Alara, and his heart clenched in old confusion. But when his eyes adjusted, he saw the stranger, the woman from the storm, sitting near the fire, cradling Clara against her breast. The baby nursed quietly, cheeks warm and pink again. The sight was so simple, so human, it nearly broke him. Mara. That was her name, he learned later that morning. She spoke it softly when he finally asked, as though it had once belonged to someone else, and she wasn't sure she still had the right to it. Mara Lynn. Her voice carried the faint drawl of the plains, but was gentler, threaded with a weariness that told more truth than any confession could. The storm had left the world buried. Outside, snow clung to the window panes in crooked patterns like frozen veins. Silas chopped wood while she swept the hearth with a branch broom she found by the door. Neither spoke much. It wasn't the silence of strangers, but of people afraid that words might shatter the fragile peace they'd found. When Clara stirred, Mara rocked her with practiced tenderness, and Silas found himself watching, ashamed at first for the ease he felt seeing another hold what he'd been failing to keep alive. "You've done this before," he said finally. She smiled faintly. "Once, a long while back. My boy didn't make it past his first winter." Her gaze drifted to the window. World took more than it gave. Silas nodded. Understanding threaded through his chest like wire. World's good at that. For 2 days, they lived like that, in quiet rhythms of survival. She cooked small meals from what little he had, fed the baby, washed linen in melted snow. He worked through the drifts to keep the firewood stocked, each swing of the axe pulling ghosts from his muscles. In the evenings, when the firelight turned the room to amber, they spoke in fragments, enough to let understanding breathe between them. He learned that Mara's husband had been a drifter, the kind that promised the world and gave only footprints. She'd followed him from town to town until hunger made her see him for what he was, a shadow with a name. He'd left her near the mining camps 2 months ago, and she'd been walking since, chasing rumors of work that never came true. When she spoke, Silas listened not with pity, but recognition. They were both carved from the same wood. People shaped by loss, but still standing because collapse wasn't an option. By the third morning, the sky cleared to a bright, cruel blue. Smoke from the chimney rose straight for the first time in weeks. Silas saddled his horse to fetch more supplies. "You stay here," he said. "Storm's past, but cold's worse than ever." She nodded. "I'll keep the fire going." When he reached town, the air changed. Not the weather, but the weight of it. Folks watched him from under hat brims and behind frosted windows. Mrs. Tully was already waiting near the livery, a shawl tight around her shoulders and judgment tighter still. "Heard you got yourself a visitor," she said, her smile sharp as a blade. "A woman. Strange time of year for hospitality." She needed help. Help's one thing, but tongues wag fast when a widower takes in a lady no one knows. "Ain't Christian, that kind of talk." Silas said nothing. He'd learned that silence was sometimes the only defense that left dignity intact. He bought what he needed, salt, flour, candles, and turned to leave. But the sheriff intercepted him at the door. "Morning, Silas," said Amos Dyer, tugging his coat straight. "Word is you got company up there at your place." Storm stranded her. "She's leaving when weather allows. Town's just concerned is all. Folks remember what happened with Alara. Don't want to see you hurt more." Silas met the man's eyes, steady, cold, unafraid. "What happens in my house is no one's concern but mine," Dyer nodded slowly. "Just be careful. People out here survive by stories. Once a story turns wrong, it sticks." When Silas returned to the cabin, the baby was asleep, and Mara was mending one of his torn shirts with neat, patient stitches. "They don't take kindly to strangers," he said quietly. "I'm used to that. I don't care what they say." She looked up, surprised by the quiet conviction in his voice. "You should. Folks like to ruin what they don't understand." He walked closer to the fire, knelt beside her. "I understand enough." The air between them held the kind of stillness that isn't empty but heavy with something waiting to happen. The baby's faint sigh was the only sound. That evening, the wind began again. Not the savage howl of a storm, but the steady breath of another cold front rolling in. Mara stood by the window, watching it move through the trees. "You ever think of leaving this place?" she asked. "Every day," Silas said. "But the land keeps me. Maybe guilt too." She turned toward him. "Guilt don't keep people alive." "Maybe not," he said, his gaze resting on the cradle. "But it keeps them honest." They didn't speak again that night, but something invisible shifted, soft and solemn, like the ground thawing beneath the snow. The next day, the fever returned, not in Silas, not in Mara, but in Clara. The child's small body burned, her breaths shallow. Panic settled over the room like smoke. Silas sent Mara to fetch Doc Holleran, though the man lived miles away and the path was treacherous. She refused. "You'll never make it in this wind," she said. "I have to," he replied. "You stay with her." He saddled Jeb and rode into the storm that had begun to thicken again. Snow swallowed his shape within minutes. Mara pressed the baby against her chest, whispering lullabies through tears. Hours passed. The light faded. Wind clawed at the windows. When the door finally burst open, Silas stumbled in, half frozen, face raw with cold. He dropped to his knees near the fire, clutching a small pouch of medicine. "Got it," he gasped. Doc said, but he didn't finish. His strength gave out, and he collapsed. Mara dragged him closer to the fire, stripping away his coat, his gloves, anything soaked through. She rubbed warmth back into his hands, whispering his name. "Silas, you did good. You're safe," the baby whimpered weakly, her fever peaking. Mara spooned the medicine between her lips, praying under her breath. When she finally looked up, Silas's eyes were half open. Distant but alive. "You saved her," she whispered. "Maybe you saved me," he rasped. They stayed like that until dawn, Mara tending to both child and father, the three of them caught in the fragile space between life and loss. The storm eased once more, leaving the world glittering under a sheet of new snow. When morning came, Clara's fever broke. Her skin cooled, her breath grew steady. Silas stirred, saw the baby sleeping peacefully, and let out a sound that was neither laugh nor sob but something in between. Mara smiled faintly, exhaustion softening her features. "Looks like we made it," she said. "Looks like." He reached for her hand then, not out of boldness but out of instinct, and she didn't pull away. Their fingers met briefly, rough, trembling, human. It was not a promise, not yet, but something that might grow into one if given time. By noon the sun was bright, melting icicles from the eaves. Mara stood at the window, readying to leave. She wrapped her shawl tighter, looking smaller in the doorway. "You've got a good home here, Silas. She'll grow strong." He stepped forward. "You don't have to go." "I do," she said softly. "The world's still wide, and I've got pieces of myself scattered in it. But maybe I'll find my way back someday." He nodded. "Then I'll keep the fire going." Her eyes glimmered with something unspoken. Hope, fear, gratitude all at once. She bent to kiss the baby's forehead, then lingered a moment longer than necessary. "You take care of her. And yourself, I will." She opened the door. The air outside was sharp, clean, endless. For a heartbeat, the light wrapped around her like a halo, and then she was gone. Her footprints, the only proof she'd ever been real. Silas stood watching until the horizon swallowed her. Then he turned back to the cradle. Clara blinked awake, cooing softly. He lifted her, felt her warmth against his chest and whispered, "She'll come back, little one. Sometimes good things just take the long way home." He looked out the window once more. The snow had begun to fall again, softer this time, as though the heavens themselves were tired of rage. That winter, Silas learned that love didn't always arrive in the form of forever. Sometimes it came in the shape of survival. Two souls meeting in the cold, and finding enough warmth to keep the fire lit another day. And when the old narrator's voice returns to tell this story, it always ends the same way. If this tale found a place in your heart, if it reminded you of mercy, of small kindnesses that change everything, then saddle up and ride with us again. Subscribe for more Wild West tales.